Hey everybody, welcome to the Just People podcast. My name is John Mays. I'm the co-host. With me as always is Cece Jones-Davis. We've got a fantastic guest on deck today. So Cece, why don't you introduce our friend Beth?
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be back with you, John. And y'all, I'm so glad to introduce our new friend, Beth Howard. And to just give you a little bit about her, she's going to tell us more about herself, but I want to read a little piece from the sleeve of her book that describes some about this book, which we're going to be talking about today. In Song for Hard-Hit People, the title of this book, Beth Howard shares her story of growing up in Appalachian, Kentucky, the economic struggles, trauma, and ever-present sexism, along with the loving care of her close-knit rural community. These complexities shaped Howard's sense of justice and solidarity and taught her about the inextricable bonds working-class people share, despite our differences. Her childhood also left her with emotional wounds that threatened to destroy the life she built for herself. And while healing her wounds is deeply personal, there's no separating it from the people in place that made her. Beth is a cultural strategist. She is an author. She's a longtime organizer. She's a coal miner's daughter. And I think that's just so beautiful about you, Beth. And I'm so excited to hear about that. So everybody, welcome with a loud and visible to us applause. Beth Howard. Beth, thank you for being with us.
Thank you all so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we read just a little piece of this, and it doesn't quite scratch the surface of who you are and what your work is. So can you, in your own words, tell us a little bit about Beth Howard and what your work is?
Yeah. So I am from Appalachia, Eastern Kentucky. I grew up on a small family tobacco farm in a little community called Blaze, Kentucky. And someone made me look up the population the other day. It was 300 people. My little tiny, this is my little tiny community within, we went to a county school and, that sort of thing. But this was like the community I'm writing about was my little close-knit 300 people farming community. But I grew up on a small family tobacco farm. My dad was a coal miner and my mom worked at a grocery store and then later a factory. And I always share, start with what they did for work because I say that defined everything about me and the way that we grew up and the way that we understood the world as working class people. There's a long kind of origin story, which I wrote a book about, but I started community organizing about 20 years ago now, through a kind of what felt like fate, on my college campus, like going to an orientation about power and about communities and about how we create systemic change, that just kind of set me on fire. And so I've organized in the U.S. South for almost 20 years, primarily in my home state of Kentucky. And then I joined staff at Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is the largest national organization that is organizing white people away from white supremacy and towards multiracial solidarity. And then this is my first book. I wanted to be a writer since I was a little girl. And so it took me about 40 years, but I finally did it. And so I'm really, really proud and grateful that I get to talk about this book in the world as well.
Yeah, a writer you are, sis. A writer you are. I'm wondering, Hard-Hit People is a part of the title. And I'm sorry, folks, I failed to read the rest of the title because I think it's really important. The book is called Song for a Hard-Hit People, a memoir of anti-racist solidarity from a coal miner's daughter. And I really encourage folks to get your book, Beth. I met you recently and I heard you read an excerpt. And folks, you're an amazing writer, Beth. You really are. When you talk about hard-hit people, let's set the scene. Who are you talking about?
Yeah. So when I say hard-hit people, and we chose that kind of phrasing, one, because it's culturally a Hazel Dickens song, Hazel Dickens was a bluegrass singer who was also, culturally talking and singing and being an activist in the coal fields and union struggles in Appalachia. So it's a nod to Hazel Dickens, but also to say that, there are many stereotypes about Appalachia and about working class white uh, country people. And so, we have that kind of hillbilly stereotype in our minds. And some of that language and that imagery has been used to really justify the way that people are treated economically in this country. And that same kind of framing is used against Black communities, immigrant communities, Indigenous communities. And that's to say that, let's say Appalachia is in poverty because the people here, we don't want anything better for ourselves. We're lazy. We're not intelligent. All we want to do is, be violent and, be addicted to drugs and other substances. And we don't want anything better for ourselves. And that erases the reality that we live in a system that benefits billionaires, like a handful of billionaires at the top, while the rest of us suffer and struggle. And so Appalachia is not a place that is just, we just don't want anything nice here. We are a place that has been hit very hard by exploitive and extractive systems. And so then it's left us here to suffer and struggle. And so I really wanted to put that framing out into the world, opposed to this kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
You said something that I thought was we're just going to jump into the deep end here.
Yeah.
And when you were talking, you said, I'm part of this organization that's trying to help specifically white people move away from white supremacy and into, I think you said anti-racist work or like solidarity work. And when I hear that, and being in Oklahoma, the idea when I'm having conversations with folks, when they think of white supremacy, they're like, "Oh, I'm not a white supremacist." Like they're thinking Klan hats and rallies and just open bigotry and like hearts full of hate. And they're like, "Well, I'm not that." But I would love for you to define just what you mean when you say white supremacy, because I think that helps frame the whole conversation for folks.
Yeah, totally. And when I say that, I'm talking about a system that we have. I would say globally, but especially in America, and especially in the American South, that says that whiteness is superior to any other way of being in this country, right? And we can see male supremacy as well, to saying that being a straight white man is the ideal identity and lived experience that makes them smarter or more capable, and that we should all aspire to that. And so that's kind of what I mean is the culture kind of, I've heard people describe it as the water we're swimming in, right? So much so that we often don't question, right, the things that we're told, things that we're given. And so part of our political education is to start to understand and see the water we're swimming in. And in this case, it's white supremacy. And I would say that racism is a feature of that, in the sense that that's often the way that we see it interacting with people saying racist things, the Klan, organized white supremacy. But it's also a mindset. It's also a culture that benefits and lifts up whiteness, opposed to any other way of being in the world. And also that race was manufactured and created, that it's not a real, inherent, natural paradigm. That really human beings want to go towards each other. We want to be in community together. And so the ruling class had to keep us from doing that. There's plenty of times in our history where workers were coming together, all what we would say is a multiracial kind of working people's movements and revolts. And so the ruling class had to be like, well, we can't let this happen. And so we're going to tell the poor, what we see as poor white people now, that they're white, and therefore they have a little bit more safety and they have a little bit more benefit if they turn their back on Black and brown people. Right. And so that has then worked all throughout history to get working class or white people living in poverty to side with whiteness instead of other people who are working class.
Yeah, the reason I keep kind of hammering that point home is there's just this idea that white supremacy is this extreme thing, but it's also really subtle, like you talked about, like the water that we swim in, because we're just so used to it. And so when someone hears you say these things and like, well, I grew up poor, I grew up in the same situation, and I was able to do X, Y, and Z. essentially what they're saying is like, well, my experience trumps your experience. My experience holds more weight, more water than your experience does. And so nothing ever changes. And so the reason I appreciate you explaining that to folks is that it really does. It helps us see that because as a straight, white, middle-aged man, I am constantly, who's been doing like justice work for like 10 years, like I have to keep unlearning and relearning things because there's so many things that are just ingrained in me that I think, well, this is how the world works. But when I hear somebody else's lived experience, that it makes it a lot more complex and complicated. It's like, okay, well, that's how my world works. How come that's not working out in their world? And that points us back to these systems that you're talking about. So I just really appreciate the way you broke that down.
Yeah. And, I always, in our training, I am organizing in, purposely, strategically in working class white communities in the South. And so we are doing that because we know that our opponents, the far right, are targeting communities like mine, communities that are majority white, that are living in poverty, and are saying to them, whether that be in our algorithms, whether that be on, podcasts or AM radio or Fox News, and, even person to person, the reason that you're hungry, the reason that you don't have health care, and the reason that you're scared all the time is because immigrants are moving into the community, right? Or that Black people are taking things that were supposed to be yours. And it's kind of that don't look up at the top, don't look at the billionaires, but we need you to fight each other. So when we are knocking on a door, let's say, of a white person living in poverty in a trailer park in Appalachia, I'm not leading with, let's talk about your white privilege or let's talk about white supremacy. I'm kind of relying on tried and true community organizing tactics, which is to say, what's going on here in the community, right? Like, what do you love about where you live and what is hard? What are you struggling with? What keeps you up at night? And almost always, I'm going to hear about housing, food, worrying about making the rents, worrying about their kids at school, worrying about keeping food on the table and getting medicine. And then it's being able to talk to people about why are we living this way, right? And to say that, to point their anger and rage towards those at the top and away from fighting each other, to kind of inoculate ourselves to say, one of the things that happens, and it's a tried and true tactic, is that those at the top, the billionaires who, have everything or getting the best healthcare in the world, want us to fight immigrants and want us to fight with working class Black people, right? So that we don't fight with them. And so having that conversation is a way in to talk about racism, to talk about whiteness that keeps the door open opposed to getting it slammed in our face.
Really good. So good. But I'm wondering, still have a lot of questions around like your origin story, your roots. And then I have 1,000 more questions, but I just want to go back for a second. I've heard you talk about working class. You use that term a lot, and I would love for you to tell me, what does it mean? Like, what does it really mean to be a coal miner's daughter? What does that really mean? And what is the difference for just people who who might not be as familiar with these terminologies? What's the difference between middle class and working class?
Yeah. So I always kind of claim my working class identity as a way of, one, being really proud of who I am, but in a politicizing way of making class visible. So I think one of the things we were just kind of talking about is often white people want to think that we have more than we have, or that we're have more money than we have, that we're doing great. And that's kind of this, and I would say that goes into middle class, identifying as middle class, meaning you're not a working class person or you're not living in poverty, is kind of this American standard of we watch a sitcom, they're middle class family, where your parents, if it's, your parents or you are making a salary and you can send your kids to college and, without taking out loans and all of, you're working kind of maybe a white collar job, professional class kind of job. And I think those with a lot of money will identify as middle class, and those who are working class will often identify as middle class. And so I think I would say there's not really a middle class anymore in America, that we're mostly working class, and then those who are at the top. And there's different experiences within the working class, right? There are those who live in poverty, and that's a very different experience than how I grew up. And so I grew up with the reason I say working class is because we worked for a living. We had bosses, and they could determine the quality of our lives, right? They could determine if we had if my parents were able to give their kids a nice Christmas that year, right? They determined if we had health care. And so I say anybody is working class if you're working for a living, if you got a boss, if you're, which most of us are living paycheck to paycheck. And I think we're really taught to be ashamed of, and to not talk about money.
Yeah.
And so part of our role as organizers is to build class consciousness. And so thinking about the previous statement about like a white person might say, well, I grew up and, I grew up in poverty and now look at me, I'm doing this thing, right? I'm a contractor or something like that. And now I have a home of my own. Why can't other people do that? But as the organizer, it's on me to start asking questions because usually they're in debt. They are actually worrying about money. And for some reason, they're siding with white people with more money than they actually have. And so I think part of American culture is to see ourselves as individuals and to project that we are more well off and more financially secure than we actually really are.
Yeah.
And it's to keep us from talking honestly about money and class in this country.
Coal miner's daughter. I mean, outside of that meaning that you are part of the working class, what else does it mean to be a coal miner's daughter?
Yeah, so that's also a nod to Loretta Lynn, who's a country singer, and her kind of classic song, I was born a coal miner's daughter. And so I wanted to really speak to her and Hazel Dickens and kind of call on their legacy of being Appalachian women.
Yeah.
Who were using art and culture and stories to talk about their lived experience in the world. And, my dad and my grandfather and my uncle and so many of the men I knew were working in coal mining. And so when you live in a region like Appalachia, coal defined the region, whether we like that or not. And many, many people worked in coal mines or, were married to somebody or their family worked in coal mining. And also we were always battling coal companies, whether that was consciously or not. These big corporations that at times in our history really operated as authoritarian entities in our communities. And so the cover of my book is a red bandana, and that calls back to the class solidarity amongst coal miners, particularly in 1921 in West Virginia, which is the Battle of Blair Mountain, which is the largest multiracial labor uprising in our country's history, where 10,000 coal miners, white, black, and immigrant, picked up arms to fight for their right to unionize in the coal fields of West Virginia. And they wore red bandanas around their necks to symbolize that they were Union. And they were referred to in the media and just generally as the Redneck Army, and they were called rednecks. And so here in Appalachia, we've been doing a lot of work to, first of all, uncover that history. That is a very dangerous history. And that history is not taught in textbooks. It's not well known at all because a story of poor white people or working class white people, black people, and immigrants coming together to overthrow an authoritarian system is a very dangerous history for those in power.
Okay, so Beth, you talked, you've talked a lot about white supremacy. Recently, I made a post that I think made some folk a little bit nervous who know me, and I said, we are in an all-out war against white supremacy.
Yeah.
And, there was a friend of mine who came back, I think, to clarify or help clarify for a lot of some folks who might have been, kind of unnerved by that statement to say, hey, she's not saying we're in an all-out war against white people.
Right.
An all-out war against white supremacy. And, she's exactly right. And that war should be fought by everybody. That's Black and everyone else, right? We are in an all-out war against white supremacy and the systems and the immoral situations that white supremacy create, right?
Yeah.
You created a campaign that went viral called Rednecks for Black Lives. Beth, what in the world? Tell me everything. Tell me everything about red
Totally.
Black lives.
Well, that kind of goes back to the story I just shared about the miners in Blair Mountain who were called rednecks. And so, like many people in 2020, I was watching the largest racial justice uprising in my lifetime play out on TV, and I'm in Kentucky also where Breonna Taylor was murdered by Louisville Metro Police as she slept. And so I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, and a lot of my chosen family and organizing colleagues and community were in the streets in Louisville. And we were here in the streets in Lexington. And, I felt very heartbroken. And like so many people, and I would say so many white people, I was watching the commentary play out on social media. And I would see so many working class white Appalachian people. Well, first of all, there were a lot of us who were very loud and on the right side, right? Very clear, like, stop police murder of Black people, and there were those of us who were like, abolish the whole damn system, right? But many, if they couldn't say that, they would at least say, this is wrong. This is an injustice. This is not okay. But there were a whole lot of white people who were saying things that were siding with police, who were saying, thin blue line, if you just comply with police, you won't get murdered, and these kinds of things that were, to me, very heartbreaking. And also was an indicator of like how far we had come from our redneck ancestors and like our roots in labor organizing, which is the only reason the cops were ever called in was to break up a strike, right? And to harass people. I mean, if we think about when I talked about living in authoritarian coal company territory, if you worked for a coal company, they paid you in scrip, which was not even real money, right? You could only use it at their company store, and they owned your housing. And so if you tried to unionize or anything, they would throw out your housing. They would come and destroy your food and your ability to take care of your family, and so they would also bring in cops who brutalized and terrorized people. And that's been true for, up until like present day. Working class white people, the police are not our friends, right? And so I wanted to call us back to our best selves and remind us of our history. And so that's why, I kept thinking like, God, somebody needs to say something because we are forgetting who we are. Like actually working class white Appalachia, like we have been on the side of workers and of class solidarity. And the cops have harassed us and terrorized us as well. And so I wrote Rednecks for Black Lives as kind of a rallying cry. And I wasn't really sure how it would take off because it is a very provocative title. And of course, generally when we hear the word redneck, of course, we think of racism almost synonymously now, which I would also argue has been a purposeful campaign to hide this history, this radical history. And so there's a lot of us reclaiming that history as a way to show that we are committed to class solidarity and to racial justice. And so when I hit publish on it was a self-published Medium essay. I really closed my eyes and hit publish because I was scared that it was going to backfire. But it didn't. It actually went viral and it was very resonant. And a lot of working class white people here said it was a way to talk to their family about race and about racism in a way that they could hear because it talked about our history in a way they felt proud of.
It's powerful. That's really powerful.
So thinking back to 2020, I was a part of a big evangelical church. And so there was this weird thing, you could go, you wouldn't promote that folks were marching, but we'll turn a blind eye while you all are out there. But then I think through even some of the folks that I would see out there and what they're doing now specifically. And so I would just love to hear you kind of speak through the difference between actual allyship and the performative allyship, which is I'm going to show up, I'm going to take the Instagram photo and hold a sign, and I've made my impact. I've made a difference. Or using social media, which is what a lot of people know how to use. Is what are the easy tools and the things I can do versus the deep, long-lasting change, the harder work of truly being an ally.
That's right. Yeah. And so I think one of the things we do at Surge, which is, as I said, showing up for racial justice, it's the largest multiracial largest, sorry, let me start over. Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, is the largest national organization that's organizing white people towards multiracial solidarity and away from whiteness and white supremacy. And, a couple of the things that we do are we have different bases. Always am like, there's a lot of white people in this country. So one of the things that Surge does is kind of mobilize the group of people who are already with us. And so those might be people, John, like you were talking about, who might show up to a march or post things on social media, but they really need a step more than that. Like they would self-identify as, I'm a white person who is against racism. And so Surge can be a place for people to move them into concrete action, whether that was in 2020, getting more involved with local racial justice organizing and doing their part, being a part of a local kind of Surge grouping of white people who are working in coalition with local people of color movements. Right now, a lot of our work the past couple of years has been doing ICE defense, so getting people doing community defense to protect their neighbors from ICE, but also getting involved in electoral campaigns where we are really trying to elect progressive champions, elect Black leadership, and we need white voters to show up to the polls and do that. And so I think, getting involved in Surge is one way to move people from kind of, I made a post on Instagram and now I'm on my way to taking more tangible action. And then what we really try to do, and this kind of is really clear for the population of white people that I have organized, which are white people who either are already with us, kind of like I talked about, but are living in more rural places that don't have a lot of organizing infrastructure yet or towards racial justice yet, or people who are open to what we're saying, but they're not involved in a group yet, or people who are kind of vulnerable and can kind of be going either way, right? Like they can get caught up in right-wing talking points and get confused, but their values are aligned, and we need to get to those folks and move them along. And so part of what Surge has really tried to move people towards is a framework of shared interest, opposed to just a framework of kind of like white privilege and kind of keeping white people in shame and guilt. And it's not saying that white privilege doesn't exist. It very much does, but it's trying to help white people understand that this is our issue. It's not just a favor we're doing for people of color, right? But we have to, as Ann Braden, a white Southern anti-racist Kentuckian ancestor, said, white people, like, we have to fight against white supremacy, like our lives depend on it, because they do. And so as long as white people keep choosing whiteness instead of their class, we are not going to have health care. We're not going to have housing. We're not going to have jobs with dignity. We will have none of those things either. And so we have to really organize people as seeing that racial justice is not just a side issue that doesn't impact us, or we just put a pickup on Instagram and keep it moving, but that we have to fight for against this and for each other to have anything that working class white people need or want as well.
Very, very interesting. Proud of being white. You talked a second ago about shame and guilt that I feel like so many of our white brothers and sisters feel this real call to like push up against. Like, I wasn't around during slavery. I haven't lynched anybody. I'm struggling like everybody else. And so this pushback against shame and guilt and the idea that being white is bad. And there's a big part of me that can really empathize with that. Imagine being born, like I can identify with that, being born as a person in your own skin and feeling like that, people inherently believe that you are evil because you are born in the body that you are born in. As a Black woman, I can identify with how frustrating that has to be. And so I wonder from you, Beth, like, what has been your experience helping white people understand their power and like this move away from a feeling of that people are trying to shame you or guilt you for being white, but that like whiteness does have these qualities that can help you empower your communities, right? Like how is that? How do you help people kind of work that out?
Yeah. Totally. I'll just share from my own experience. I first came into racial justice conversations probably around the around the era of like Ferguson and the uprisings in Ferguson and the police murder of Michael Brown. And there were a lot of kind of what we would say is like these kind of DEI. I don't even know if they were called that at that time, diversity, equity, inclusion, but a lot of kind of very identity-based racial justice kind of trainings that focused very heavily on white privilege. And so there really wasn't a lot of like class nuance to it or like kind of lived experiences of different kinds of ways that white people live, especially like Kentucky's the fifth poorest state in the nation, the way that, depending on your calculations, but usually in the top 5. And so a lot of the way it was talked about was kind of speaking to white people who were born in a more professional class, who had more money and more like social privileges than somebody like my mom didn't graduate high school. She had my brother when she was 16 years old. My dad went to college for a semester and dropped out and went to work in coal mines because he had a family to raise. So it's a very different day-to-day experience. But in my experience going through that, it left a lot of us who had a very clear like class interest in fighting against white supremacy. It left us in a lot of guilt and shame and kind of not knowing what to do next. And I think for me, it made me really quiet and small in a way that was not helpful. I was scared to say anything out loud because I was afraid I would say something wrong and I would end up hurting somebody, which I was like, I've already, me and my people, we've hurt so many people already, and we're part of this kind of racist system and machine. And it just made me really timid in a way that actually wasn't very helpful to our movement. And so one of the things that really helped me and that we try to move people towards is that more shared interest framework to say, like, our lived experience as people who are really struggling economically in this country, or even people who just want their children, to be safe at school and maybe aren't as economically struggling. But, whatever is happening in our lives, it will only be better if we fight for racial justice.
Yeah.
And to kind of move us away from feeling scared of making mistakes because it's not helping. And so I think like trying to create a culture within white anti-racism where we're not canceling each other, like that has kind of been a thing with white anti-racist people kind of wanting a gold star. Like we want to be good. And so we get on social media and call other white people racist, right? Or push them out of the group as a way of like, don't look at me. This is all them, right? And so I think it's upon people like me and John and other people to welcome white people in and to let us make mistakes and to be there with each other when we do, to help us like move through that guilt and shame. And for me, like I had to get really angry about class in America and about the way that, I feel a lot of grief because I feel like people in my family died too young because of the systems we live in, how hard they had to work. The lack of medical care and access to health care they didn't have, and on and on and on. Struggles with addiction that I feel like many other communities that we have just been preyed upon, and, pharmaceutical companies just pumping our communities full of prescription pills, the opioid epidemic. And so all of this to say, I was very angry and full of grief and rage. And for me, good organizers were able to take that experience and say, we can have something different if we build a large multiracial movement. Yeah. And if we reject MAGA, if we reject Reaganites, like all of these eras of however make America great again, and if we get as many of our people, other white people, to do the same. Yeah. And so I think it really is raising class consciousness with people in a way that's not like the kind of what we were talking about, John, earlier, where it's like, well, I had it hard too. And so, therefore, this isn't about me or, whatever. But in a way of saying we all have it hard and we could all have it better if we join together. And let's stop being pawns of rich white people, because that's what they want us to be. They want us to be their foot soldiers. And they always have. Whether that is making white people, working class white people, slave catchers, which turned into the police, or making us prison guards or cops, or at work trying to break up a union by offering white people a management role. They're
Yeah.
always offer that to us. Sorry. They're always going to offer that stuff to us. And it is
Yeah.
on us, other white people, to organize ourselves and each other away from that.
So what I'm hearing you say is it should cost us something.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And the thing is that it's already costing us something to side with whiteness, right? Like none of us should have to worry so much about paying the bills. We should not have to go to the grocery store. And like groceries are outrageous.
They are.
Gas is outrageous.
Yeah.
Like people are struggling at a level that many of these people have not had to struggle at before, right? And this is a time, in my opinion, to organize them. And so I think that a lot of the way racial justice has been sold to white people is we have to give up something to be a part of it. And that may be true in some ways. But look at what all we gain, the relationships, the shot at having a world that is worth living in. You know, we gain so much, so many people, our humanity.
That's really good. To say a couple of things. First, it's so refreshing to be in conversation with people like you and John because racial justice work historically has really, really fallen in the lap for a long time in Black folks, right?
Yep.
And particularly, in my experience, Black Christian folk, right? Because it's our across the and we gotta, love our neighbor and all that. And so it's really, really refreshing to be in community with white people who are doing racial justice work and working to help other white people kind of come from out of the gaze of white supremacy and whiteness. This administration has done a doozy.
Yeah.
Everybody know how I feel about this administration. So I'm not going to start hiding it now for the just people. But this administration has done a doozy on folks, right?
That's right.
Right now, I'm thinking specifically about white people, and I'm thinking about the Lord. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Okay. This administration has done a doozy on folks, right? On white folk in particular, with MAGA and this illusion of us versus them. I wonder, and what we're seeing now is that so many people are changing their minds about the stories that they have been fed. We're watching all kind of things on social media where, Trump supporters are at the gas pump like, Mr. The hell is going on? You know what I mean? I cannot pay for groceries, cannot pay for gas, we didn't sign up for this mess. You know what I mean? And excuse me, and that's the argument, Mr. President, we did not sign up for this mess. Now, there's a whole lot that I could say to that, but I won't.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you're seeing in your work right now with people who have been supporting Trump for every time it was time to vote, they had an opportunity to vote for Trump, they did. What are you seeing in your work, in your community, in your family? What are you seeing now? And what would be your message? Like, what would be your message to people who have really been supportive of this administration? How do we move out of this?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think what I am hearing and seeing a lot is exactly what you said, Cece, that people are at the gas pump, they're at the grocery store, they're having to put groceries back because they can't pay for dinner. They're at the pharmacy and they can't pay for their medicine. And these were things that they were promised were going to get better, right? And so, people like us were like, that's BS. We're not believing Trump or MAGA. We know better, but saying autocrats, like, when CC and I met, we were in a training, this is common that a authoritarian will gain power by lying to people, right? And so that's what's happened. I mean, some people have chosen this. They are identifying as organized white supremacists. That's what they want. That's the America they want. And then there are these other white people now who may have voted in this way or not voted at all. We have very low voter turnout in the state of Kentucky. for various reasons, who are saying, I don't want this, or this is not what I signed up for. And I think that's the role of white people like me and John, is to go get those folks and to organize them into campaigns. Right now, data center fights are the biggest opportunity that I see. I mean, here in Kentucky, there are hundreds and hundreds of people showing out in rural communities as well as cities to fight against data centers. People who have never been politically active before, white people. I mean, this is an 85% white state. So the majority of these hundreds of people showing out to these community events against data centers and talking about surveillance are white people. And this is such an opportunity to talk about policing, to talk about surveillance, to talk about prisons, as well as economic justice issues that are impacting all of us. And so I think it's upon us white people to get out here and welcome these folks in. And, you know, Surge came out of a call from SNCC and the civil rights movement, from Black leadership, just like you were saying, Cece, who have been on the front lines of racial justice and civil rights for decades, and who said Jim Crow is in white communities. And so while we love the white people who are really throwing down as part of the civil rights movement, we actually need you to go organize your own people and go organize where Jim Crow is. Right? Not in Black communities.
Right.
And so, and I have a debt of gratitude to Black Southerners in churches who really taught me how to organize and showed me so much grace and love and care, and I'm so grateful for them. And I needed to go, in which I am doing, go organize my own people too, right? And so I think that it is not, you know, Cece's responsibility or anyone to welcome in Trump voters and say, we're all going to get along great now and it's all okay, welcome in, thank you. Some people will do that work, right? And they feel, you know, okay to do that, but I think the call that Surge is trying to answer is to let white people do that work. And the way we kind of see that is we say it's a low bar for entry, meaning if you change your mind, you're welcome in here, right? But it's a high bar for leadership. That doesn't mean that you all of a sudden are like, okay, well, I voted for Trump twice and now I want to be a leader for racial justice. It's like, okay, let's start small, right? And build that up. Let's build trust. Let's, you know, do some political education and change our thinking. But if someone says that to me, it's on me to get them involved, right? And to take that walk with them. And I think a lot of white people don't want to organize other white people. They want to kind of be the cool white person, right? Who is part of the Black movement, and they get to like be the good one, like I was saying. And they do that by separating themselves from other white people who they deem to be bad. And that's not the work we need to be doing right now. We have got to go organize white people because we need them to move. We need them to choose the right side. We need them to vote for candidates who care about all of us, right? Who are not siding with a fascist future where we're all going to be suffering and struggling.
Y'all preaching, Beth. I'm tell you right now, y'all need to go buy this lady's book. A song for a hard-hit people, a memoir of anti-racist solidarity from a coal miner's wife. You are out here doing this work, and it's just so refreshing to my entire soul. For you to say this is really like CC's work, I need somebody to tell me that, because I don't know why I don't know why I'm out here assuming that it is. But I do have like I do live in that tension. You know, I do feel like this. I do feel this sense of responsibility as a Christian.
Of course.
And as a Black woman, I'm tired and angry as I can possibly be, you know.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you just having that whole mindset and saying all those wonderful things. 'Cause it takes a whole lot of pressure off me. It does.
Well, you know, and my mentors, you know, I have white anti-racist mentors and I have Black Southern mentors, you know, and some of them will say, you know, I'm going to organize whoever is in front of me and wants to get involved, whether they're Black or white or immigrant or brown, it doesn't matter, you know. And other people who are like, I'm tired, and I get that. And so I am also just like really trying to orient myself and other white people towards like, this is our work. And it's one of the most important things we can be doing right now is because our people are being recruited towards white supremacy and are already, you know, deep in it, some of them. And so it's tearing our communities apart, it's tearing families apart, and it's causing real harm to people now and to our collective future. And so so when white people are like, what do we do? I'm like, go organize other white people is a really important thing to do. And of course, do that in solidarity, in coalition with people of color movements as much as possible. Move money to racial justice if you have money to move, and those sorts of things. And like, we need to be in our own communities talking and setting an example that there's another way to be a white Southerner and a white American in this country, and that is to be in solidarity.
I'm curious, is there a difference? And so, one, I'm going to push another podcast that I just listened to. It's called First America. I don't know if either of you have listened to that. It is amazing. It's short. It was 6 weeks or 6 episodes, but it came out right around the 250th celebration of America. But it's told specifically like from the native, from tribal perspective. And one of the professors that they had on just brought out the fact that, like, while we're tinkering with the Constitution and Bill of Rights, there's this other kind of guide for how we, like, this is who we are, but then this is how we interact with the people that aren't we, right? And so while you're building a democracy for some, you're also building the playbook for colonization.
Right.
Specifically, like, hey, natives, this isn't for you. So like, this is how we treat you. This is how we treat others. And you can actually still see that play out in like Puerto Rico right now. Yeah. And in fact, like, some of the law around the Articles of Discovery or the Doctrine of Discovery was in the Supreme Court ruling as early as recent as 2005. So like, we're still using some of that stuff now. But one of the things that stood out to me is they mentioned, it's like, unless you fundamentally believe that you are somehow better than natives, than blacks, than Puerto Ricans, than whatever people group is being colonized, then you have to understand that this is a moving target. And at any point in time, you can cease being part of the inside group and you can find yourself on the outside group, and you will be playing by a completely different set of rules. Yeah. And that, I don't know, like, as I was hearing you speak, like, that quote just kept coming to mind, is like that feeling of all of the fear that everyone's feeling, particularly in rural America. Like, you're starting to feel that squeeze. Like, there's a different set of rules. You're being more colonized than you are cared for as part of the in group.
Right. And, there are places like Appalachia would say that are majority white. And I want to be clear that, like, this is also a multiracial place, especially a history that was more multiracial than it is now. And that's an important story to tell about people of color being pushed out, especially after the coal industry. So want to make sure that I really am not erasing that this is a place of people of color, and also owning the reality that it is very white and it is very poor. And we have always kind of been a place where the ruling classes come to take coal and other natural resources, right? And then kind of export that out to other parts of the country, especially bigger cities. And so I always think of Appalachia as being a group of white people who have really been at the brunt of extractive forces that have a real natural solidarity. And yes, like right now, we are people who have never had to struggle before or not seen themselves as part of a working class are now feeling that. And that's our time to get in there and politicize them, to help them see that, like, whiteness is not keeping us safe. That's a lie. That is all an illusion. If anything, it's keeping us struggling, right? And so, I think right now is a real time to help us see that the only safety we have is to be part of a working class that's multiracial. It's not siding with whiteness, and to start to see that we're not safe, right?
All right, Beth, I feel like we have learned so much today. I know I have. And I almost feel like you're an anomaly of sort. I'm praying that there's all kind of folk involved in Surge and Rednecks for Black Lives and all the amazing things that you do. And I'm gonna read your book again, actually, and I'm really gonna encourage people to read it, because I think there's so much behind what makes a voice like yours like what causes a person from where you are, from the time you're in, from the family you're from, evolve to where the work that you're doing. And so I really want to encourage people to read your book, because I feel like you give us all just so much hope about, like, who we can be and how we can how we can awaken to certain things and put our history back together and all of these. What your final thought for us would be today, and I wonder what's giving you hope right now.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's giving me a lot of hope is kind of something we've been talking about through our whole conversation today, but just to kind of put a point on it, is all the people that I think are potentially ready to be organized or ready to be politicized towards the kind of future that we want. One where we all have the material things that we need in life and that everybody is treated with fairness and dignity. And so whether that be local data center, hundreds of people turning out to fight data centers, to people who are realizing that they've been lied to, who are struggling to make ends meet and who are angry about it and who are ready to take action, who we can bring in. And so that's giving me a lot of hope. And I would say that, I would love for people to read my book and get involved with Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, surge.org, if that's something that you're interested in. And I would say you can follow me on Working Class Love Notes at Substack and BethHowardKY.com. And I think for other people who my story might speak to, there's a way that you can grow up working class in America and white and read your story as every hardship you've experienced is a reason to kind of dig down and say, I'm just going to fight this alone and pull myself up by my bootstraps. And I did this. Why can't everybody else? Or you can read your life in such a way that every single one of those experiences point you towards solidarity with other people. And I wrote my book in hopes of showing that to others. And I think that I hope more and more people every day, more and more working class white people, rural Southerners, see that everything in our life that has been a struggle is only pointing us towards the opportunity to be in this shoulder to shoulder, white, black, and brown, for a world that we actually all deserve.
Beth, thank you. That you were a gift this morning. I appreciate this conversation so very much. I feel like, we could come back to this again, Cece, here before the end of the year. You've got a lot of wisdom in this one. So also, can we get a Surge chapter in Oklahoma? I feel like we're missing. I checked out the website. I clicked the link and I'm like, not here. We need one here.
Well, they're kind of moving away from the kind of chapter model, and they're doing more of what they're calling circles. And so, which is like kind of more local groups of people who are kind of involved in national campaigns. So some chapters still exist, but they're kind of moving towards the circle model. So anyway, if you get involved and kind of get in the pipeline, then we'll hear about it. And some of them are working on like ICE defense. Some of them are doing electoral work or, whatever other things are happening. But
perfect. I'll check it out.
Yeah. And then I'm involved in the more I'm not doing it day to day anymore, but I helped found it. And it's kind of more the slower door to door going to get people who may not be with us yet. Kind of what we were talking
about. Very good. Cool. I totally just hijacked that ending. So that part out. Great. Beth, thank you so much for being with us today on the Just People podcast. Again, Cece, you want to close us out?
Y'all, go get Beth's book. Go ahead and sign up. Go on to the Surge website and figure out how to become a part of a circle. And let's just keep putting one foot in front of the other and doing what we feel like we should do next. Because I think we totally make the road by walking right now. And I'm glad to be in the world at this time with Beth Howard and with John May. So thank y'all. Everybody, thank you for listening. Go ahead and like, share, comment, do all the things that help other people connect to the Just People podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thank y'all.
All right. Peace and love, y'all.
So much. Thank you.